Imagine a world where debates dominate every conversation, where winning an argument is seen as the ultimate proof of intelligence. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, is arguing really a sign of strength, or could it be a mask for something deeper, perhaps even weakness? Could it be that constant conflict is not strength at all, but a subtle form of insecurity? Today, we'll step into the world of Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most provocative thinkers in history, to explore why, in his eyes, arguing is often the refuge of the weak. And if you stay with me until the very end, you might not only question the way you handle conflict, but also see human interaction through an entirely new lens. Nietzsche didn't just criticize the habit of arguing. He challenged the very way society defines strength. He believed true strength does not come from overpowering others with words, but from the courage to stand firm in your convictions, even in silence. For Nietzsche, those who are always eager to argue are often compensating for something they lack: inner clarity and genuine self-assurance. So why do we argue? Is it to prove a point, to assert dominance, or simply to protect a fragile sense of self? Nietzsche argued that beneath most disputes lies an ego craving validation, a need to feel seen and confirmed by others. But the truly strong individual does not rely on external approval. They are grounded in their own truth, unshaken by the dissent of the crowd. In his masterpiece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche introduced the figure of the overman, a person who rises above social norms, lives authentically, and commits to the path of self-overcoming. The overman does not waste time in trivial disputes. Why? Because their focus is not on proving themselves to others, but on transcending themselves. Think back to the last argument you had. Was it really about the topic at hand, or was there something deeper, a hidden desire to appear intelligent, to be seen as right, to feel worthy? Nietzsche would say that your reaction in that moment reveals where your true strength lies or where your insecurity is exposed. In the next part, we'll go deeper into Nietzsche's ideas on strength and power and uncover why he believed most arguments are illusions, distractions from the real challenge of mastering ourselves. To understand Nietzsche's view on arguments, we first need to step back and look at his broader philosophy of power. At the heart of his thinking lies the concept of the will to power. For Nietzsche, this wasn't just the desire to survive, it was the driving force behind all human behavior, the urge to grow, to thrive, and to assert oneself in the world. But here's the twist. He believed that true power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. And this is where arguments become so revealing. Most people argue not because they're strong, but because they feel threatened. They feel incomplete, insecure, or unsure of their own stance. So instead of confronting their inner void, they project their fear outward in the form of endless debates. Nietzsche saw this pattern as a sign of weakness, not strength. He often criticized what he called the herd mentality, the tendency of people to conform to social norms and seek validation through the approval of others. Arguments in this sense often serve the herd. They help people prove their loyalty to shared beliefs, reinforce their place within the group, or silence those who make them uncomfortable. But for Nietzsche, this was the behavior of the weak. The strong individual, the overman, does not need the herd's applause or agreement. They live by their own values even when those values clash with the crowd. You can see this dynamic play out everywhere today. Think about the endless debates that unfold online, heated comment sections, social media feuds, arguments that spiral into personal attacks. How often do these conversations change anyone's mind? Almost never. Instead, they reveal the insecurities of the participants, the desperate need to be right, the hunger to feel superior, the fear of vulnerability. Nietzsche would challenge us to look at these moments differently. What if instead of reacting defensively, we shifted our energy toward inner growth? What if instead of burning hours trying to prove someone wrong, we use that energy to strengthen ourselves, to live more authentically, more courageously, more in alignment with who we really are? Breaking free from the cycle of argument requires a radical change in focus, from external validation to internal mastery. And Nietzsche would say that's where real courage begins, the courage to confront your own fears, face your flaws, and embrace the discomfort of growth. In the next part, we'll explore how this shift changes not only the way we handle disagreements, but also the way we build relationships, transforming conflict from a battlefield into a path toward deeper understanding. At this point, you might be wondering if arguing is often a mask for insecurity. What does real strength look like when disagreements arise? For Nietzsche, the answer is not found in winning debates, it's in transcending them. Strong individuals, he believed, don't shy away from hard conversations, but they also don't feel the need to prove their worth through conflict. Instead, they listen with openness, engage with ideas instead of egos, and remain grounded in their values even when challenged. This is a different kind of power, quiet, steady, and far more resilient than loud rhetoric. Imagine this scenario: someone questions your beliefs or criticizes your actions. The natural impulse is to defend yourself, to argue back, to prove them wrong. But what if instead of reacting, you paused? What if you reflected, asking whether there's a kernel of truth in their criticism, or simply choosing to let it pass without being shaken? Nietzsche would call this strength, not weakness. It's not passivity, it's self-mastery. It shows that your sense of worth doesn't rise and fall with other people's opinions. This perspective also has powerful implications for conflict resolution. When we stop seeing disagreements as battles to be won, we can start seeing them as opportunities for growth, both for ourselves and for those we engage with. That shift transforms not only personal relationships, but also how we contribute to society at large. It's the difference between dialogue and debate. Dialogue is collaborative, rooted in curiosity and mutual respect. Debate, by contrast, is adversarial, rooted in ego and the need to dominate. Nietzsche believed that most arguments are fueled by what he called resentment, a reactive energy, where people define themselves in opposition to others instead of creating their own values. It's a draining cycle that keeps people small, tethered to external forces. But the alternative, choosing reflection over reaction, dialogue over domination, leads to self-overcoming, one of the core principles in his philosophy. Think about how different your own life might feel if you approach disagreements this way. Instead of asking, "How can I win?" you'd ask, "What can I learn here? How can this moment sharpen me rather than distract me?" In the next part, we'll dive deeper into Nietzsche's critique of truth itself and why he believed that chasing universal truths through argument is far less important than living authentically in pursuit of your own. Nietzsche's critique of arguing goes hand in hand with his radical view of truth. He once declared, "There are no facts, only interpretations." At first, this sounds unsettling. Does it mean truth doesn't exist? Not exactly. What Nietzsche meant is that truth is never neutral. It's always shaped by perspective, experience, and interpretation. And this is why he saw arguing as so futile. When we argue, we often assume that our version of the truth is the only valid one. We dismiss others as wrong, misguided, or even foolish. But if truth is always filtered through perspective, then what is the point of fighting over it? For Nietzsche, the pursuit of your personal truth, your values, your meaning, your path, was far more important than debating some so-called universal truth. This idea is liberating, but it's also deeply challenging. To live by it means letting go of the constant need to be right. It means embracing uncertainty, ambiguity, and the possibility that other perspectives can coexist alongside your own. Most people find this uncomfortable, which is why they cling to arguments. Arguing feels safer than admitting that reality is complex. Nietzsche invites us to flip this mindset. Instead of arguing to defend an illusion of certainty, we can use disagreements as mirrors, opportunities to reflect on what our reactions reveal about us. Why do I feel the need to defend this so fiercely? Is it because I truly believe it, or because my ego feels threatened? What does this moment show me about the values I actually live by? Think about how this shift could change your interactions. Imagine listening to someone you disagree with, not to refute them, but to expand your understanding. Imagine seeing their perspective not as a threat, but as a lens through which to sharpen your own. Suddenly, conflict isn't a war zone, it's a classroom. Nietzsche's point isn't that truth doesn't matter. It's that truth matters most when it is lived, not argued about. Your life, your choices, and your integrity speak louder than any debate ever could. In the next part, we'll explore Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming, why he believed the real struggle of life isn't about defeating others in arguments, but about conquering the fears, doubts, and ego that hold us back from becoming who we are meant to be. One of Nietzsche's most powerful ideas is the concept of self-overcoming. For him, life is not static, it is a constant process of challenge, growth, and transformation. True strength, in his view, does not come from defeating others in argument, but from facing the internal battles that no one else can see: fear, doubt, insecurity, and the ego's endless craving for validation. When we spend our energy on arguments, Nietzsche would say we are wasting it on the wrong battlefield. Words may give us the illusion of victory, but they rarely lead to real change. The energy used to prove yourself right could be better invested in refining your character, understanding others, or creating something meaningful. The greatest battles, Nietzsche insisted, are always fought within. This idea is deeply tied to his critique of morality. Nietzsche argued that many traditional moral systems were born from resentment, a kind of hidden resentment of the powerful by those who felt powerless. Out of this resentment, values of meekness, conformity, and submission were elevated, while strength, ambition, and authenticity were condemned. In that light, arguments can be seen as an extension of this dynamic, an attempt by the weak to impose their values on others, rather than rising above their limitations through self-overcoming. So what is the alternative? Nietzsche pointed toward the art of dialogue. Unlike arguments which are adversarial and ego-driven, true dialogue is collaborative. It is about exploration, not domination. Imagine two friends disagreeing about a deeply held belief. In an argument, they would both dig in their heels, determined to win. But in a dialogue, they would ask questions, share experiences, and search for common ground. The result is not just understanding each other better, it is also personal growth for both. Nietzsche's disdain for arguing wasn't a call to avoid conflict altogether. He knew that conflict, when approached constructively, could be a powerful catalyst for growth, but he challenged us to rise above petty disputes, to see beyond the illusion of victory, and to focus on the harder but more rewarding task: overcoming ourselves. In the next part, we'll dive into Nietzsche's thought experiment of eternal recurrence, and how imagining your life repeating endlessly can transform the way you approach arguments, choices, and the pursuit of meaning. Nietzsche often used striking thought experiments to challenge the way we see life. One of his most famous is the idea of eternal recurrence. He asks us to imagine living our lives over and over again, every choice, every mistake, every triumph, repeating endlessly for all eternity. Now pause and think, would you want to spend that eternity locked in trivial arguments, chasing validation and defending your ego? Or would you rather devote it to something more meaningful, growth, creation, authenticity? This perspective is meant to shake us awake. It forces us to examine how we spend our energy. Every time we fall into pointless disputes, we're not just wasting a moment, we're shaping the kind of life we would be doomed to relive forever. Suddenly, the urgency of self-overcoming becomes clear. Why waste your finite time, let alone infinite time, on arguments that change nothing? Eternal recurrence isn't just about scaring us into action, it's also about freedom. If you imagine that your life must be repeated endlessly, it compels you to live in a way that you would gladly embrace again and again. That means choosing courage over comfort, dialogue over domination, and authenticity over pretense. Now consider how this applies to conflict. When someone provokes you, your instinct may be to argue to protect your pride, but through Nietzsche's lens, you might ask, is this really how I want to spend my eternity, locked in defensiveness, chasing a hollow victory? If the answer is no, then the choice becomes clear: rise above it. Nietzsche believed that silence too could be a form of power. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of self-assurance. A silence that says, I don't need to prove myself here, because my life is my proof. This is a radical shift in how we understand strength. It is no longer about overpowering someone else, but about being so grounded in your values that you don't need their approval or their agreement. In the next part, we'll dig deeper into Nietzsche's bold claim that there are no facts, only interpretations, and explore how embracing complexity rather than clinging to certainty can transform the way we handle disagreements. Nietzsche's statement, "There are no facts, only interpretations," is one of his most provocative. At first glance, it feels like an attack on truth itself, but Nietzsche wasn't denying reality. He was pointing out that what we call truth is always filtered through perspective. Every belief, every moral code, every worldview is an interpretation shaped by culture, history, and personal experience. This has profound implications for the way we argue. Most arguments are built on the assumption that there is one correct truth, and our job is to prove that we hold it. But if all truths are perspectives, then arguing becomes an endless tug-of-war between interpretations, each side clinging to the illusion of certainty. The result, no one really learns and no one truly grows. Nietzsche's alternative is not to give up on truth, but to live it differently. Instead of battling over abstract absolutes, he encouraged people to focus on discovering and embodying their own truth, the values and meaning that give their lives depth. That's far more powerful than shouting someone else into submission. Think of it this way. Imagine two people debating the right way to live. One insists that success comes from wealth, the other says it comes from service. They argue endlessly, neither budging. Nietzsche would ask, why waste energy proving your way is superior? Instead, live your truth fully. If wealth is your highest value, let your life embody it. If service is your path, let your choices speak louder than your words. In the end, actions reveal more than arguments ever could. When we embrace Nietzsche's idea, disagreements stop being threats to our worldview. Instead, they become opportunities to expand our perspective. Listening doesn't mean surrendering your beliefs. It means gaining new ways to sharpen them. Recognizing that your truth is an interpretation doesn't make it weaker. It makes you humble, open, and adaptable. And here's the hidden strength. When you no longer need to prove you're right, you become unshakable. The world can argue all it wants, but you're grounded in something deeper, your lived truth. In the next part, we'll explore how Nietzsche's philosophy moves beyond truth and arguments altogether toward his vision of the Overman, a figure who embodies strength not by defeating others, but by creating meaning and living authentically. To fully understand Nietzsche's challenge to the culture of arguing, we need to revisit one of his most enduring ideas, the Overman or Übermensch. This figure is not just a philosophical concept, but Nietzsche's vision of the highest human potential. The Overman is someone who rises above the herd, transcends conformity, and creates their own values rather than borrowing them from society. Here's what's striking: the Overman doesn't waste time in petty disputes. Why? Because their life is their argument. Their actions, choices, and creativity speak louder than any words ever could. To argue would be to lower themselves to a game of egos, a distraction from their greater task of self-overcoming. Contrast this with the herd mentality Nietzsche so often criticized. The herd craves validation. It argues to defend its comfort zones, to silence dissent, to reassure itself that it is right. But this only reinforces weakness because it places identity in the hands of others. The Overman, on the other hand, needs no such reassurance. Their strength is internal, unshaken by approval or rejection. Think about how radical this is in our modern world. Social media rewards constant arguing, likes, shares, endless comment wars. It confuses loudness with strength. But Nietzsche's vision calls us to step back from this noise and ask, what am I actually building with my energy? Am I creating or am I just reacting? True power for Nietzsche isn't found in the cleverness of your rebuttals, but in the authenticity of your existence. It's about embodying your truth so fully that you don't need to explain it. When your life reflects your deepest values, you no longer need to fight for validation. Your presence itself becomes undeniable. Of course, this doesn't mean the Overman avoids conflict. Conflict will always exist, but instead of being dragged into arguments, they engage on a different level through example, through action, through the art of creation. They show rather than tell. In the next part, we'll uncover how Nietzsche's idea of amor fati, the love of fate, offers a powerful way to approach disagreements, setbacks, and even pain, turning them from obstacles into stepping stones toward a more meaningful life. Another cornerstone of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea of amor fati, the love of fate. It's more than just accepting what happens to you. It's embracing every experience, every challenge, every loss as something necessary for your growth. To love fate means to stop resisting life and instead to affirm it fully, even in its harshest moments. Now think about what this means for conflict and arguing. Most of us resist disagreements. We see them as obstacles, annoyances, or threats to our ego. But through the lens of amor fati, even conflict can be embraced as part of the path. Instead of resenting it, we can ask, what is this moment here to teach me? How can I use this friction to sharpen myself rather than exhaust myself? Imagine losing an argument, for example. The herd mentality would view that as humiliation, but someone practicing amor fati would see it differently. They would recognize that being challenged is an opportunity to uncover blind spots, to refine their perspective, to grow stronger. In this way, even failure becomes fuel. Nietzsche would say that arguing drains us because it traps us in resentment, it makes us reactive, bitter, and defensive. But amor fati flips the script. It transforms those same moments into chances for self-overcoming. Instead of asking, how do I prove myself right? You ask, how can I become more through this experience? This mindset is profoundly liberating. When you love your fate, you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood, rejected, or opposed. You stop wasting energy trying to control others or force agreement, and you focus instead on living authentically. Even when life throws chaos at you, you don't just tolerate it, you embrace it as necessary. And here's the paradox: the more you stop fighting life, the stronger you become. True strength, Nietzsche believed, is not about avoiding conflict, but transforming it. It's about taking every challenge, including arguments, and turning them into raw material for your own becoming. In the next part, we'll explore how Nietzsche's critique of morality ties into this, revealing why many traditional values keep us trapped in arguments and resentment instead of helping us rise above them. To see why Nietzsche viewed so much arguing as weakness, we need to look at his critique of traditional morality. He believed that many moral systems weren't built from strength, but from what he called resentment, a deep-seated resentment of the powerful by those who felt powerless. Out of this resentment, moral codes were created that glorified meekness, submission, and conformity, while condemning ambition, strength, and individuality. In this light, arguments often become tools of resentment. Instead of striving to create or to grow, people use arguments to pull others down to their level. They impose values not because they are strong, but because they feel powerless to live differently. It's easier to argue about what's right than to embody what's possible. Nietzsche's challenge is sharp. If morality is often born out of resentment, then many arguments are little more than attempts to trap others in the same cage of limitation. This is why he pushed us to ask, am I arguing because I stand for something authentic, or because I feel threatened and want to drag someone else into my insecurity? The alternative Nietzsche offers is not moral chaos, but moral creation. Instead of inheriting values or defending them through conflict, he urged us to become value creators, to define for ourselves what is meaningful and to live it fully. That kind of life requires courage because it doesn't rely on the approval of others, and it demands action, not endless words. Consider how this reframes conflict. Two people can spend hours debating whose moral code is right, but from Nietzsche's perspective, both are trapped in the same cycle of resentment. The real breakthrough happens when one of them decides to stop arguing and start living their values authentically. In that moment, strength is revealed not through words, but through life itself. This is where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes most demanding. He isn't just telling us to avoid arguments. He's asking us to rise above the herd mentality that fuels them, to stop hiding behind resentment, and to build a life so authentic that no argument is required. In the next part, the final one, we'll bring these threads together and uncover Nietzsche's ultimate insight that the strongest argument you can ever make is not spoken, but lived. As we reach the final step of this journey, Nietzsche leaves us with a profound lesson. True strength is not about overpowering others, but about mastering yourself. All along, he has been guiding us toward one central truth, that arguments rarely change the world, but the way you live does. Think about the figure of the overman once more. This isn't someone who avoids conflict out of fear, nor someone who dominates every conversation. The overman doesn't need to argue because their life itself is the statement. Their choices, their values, their creations, these are their argument. They don't convince through words, but through the undeniable force of authenticity. And this matters even more in our time. We live in an age of constant noise where opinions fly faster than ever, and loudness is often mistaken for strength. Social media rewards outrage, and debates spiral endlessly with no resolution. Nietzsche's wisdom cuts through this chaos, reminding us to ask, what truly deserves my energy? Am I spending my time arguing, or am I building something that lasts? His call is simple but demanding. First, choose carefully which conflicts deserve your attention. Not every disagreement is worth entering. Second, approach differences with curiosity, not defensiveness. Instead of trying to win, listen, reflect, and allow the possibility of growth. And third, focus on embodying your values. Live in such a way that your actions speak louder than any speech you could give. Nietzsche's vision of a more fati, the love of fate, ties it all together. To embrace life fully, to accept its challenges, to transform every struggle into growth, that is the ultimate strength. Even conflict, even disagreement, becomes material for your self-overcoming. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to achieve? Am I protecting my ego, or am I building my life? If you can choose the latter, you will discover the power Nietzsche was pointing to all along. Because in the end, the greatest argument you will ever make isn't spoken aloud. It is the life you choose to live. And perhaps that is Nietzsche's ultimate invitation to stop wasting your breath proving who you are, and instead to become it fully, courageously, and without apology.